All right, what is going on, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome back to the one and only Wrestling Otaku channel. Of course, your personification of excellence on YouTube and YWC. We're the best reviews wrestling and your three-time YWC channel of the year. And I'm back here. It is now officially Monday, July 21st of 2025. Hope you all had a good weekend. Hope you all have a good Monday. Mine is pretty fun. Got the day off, got tomorrow off, chilling out, relaxing, don't have to be out in the fucking heat and the sun and all that bullshit, and the humidity and all that bullshit. Well, actually, I was out earlier, but just went to the store and then came back. But yeah, so I'm just kind of, relaxing, what have you. And so yeah, hope you all are having a good one as well. And I did a little short video earlier, kind of a somewhat of a challenge, if you will. If you haven't seen it, go check it out. But this is technically my second video of the day. Really my first, if you think about like a full-on video. So I want to talk about something here, and this pertains to something that happened recently, and it pertains to a sort of partnership that we have been seeing for the better part of the last year that I kind of want to touch on. And again, this all kind of ties into something that happened recently. So today I'm going to be talking about TNA. I'm going to be talking about TNA wrestling, TNA Impact Wrestling, or it goes by TNA. They go by TNA now again, TNA wrestling and all that. So they just had their Slammiversary 2025 event last night. I think I made mention of this before. And from the general consensus of the people who watched it, it was a pretty solid show. Had a multitude of, solid matches. They ran out of the UBS Arena in Long Island, New York, the same arena, the same venue that AEW has run a multitude of times. And they had a pretty solid crowd. They had well over 7,000 people back in the UBS Arena, which is apparently, according to your reports, their biggest crowd, or the biggest crowd for a live audience for TNA in a long time. So there was a lot of interest. There was a lot of buzz generated around Slammiversary last night. The biggest thing being the return of one AJ Styles, his first appearance in a TNA event, his first appearance in TNA, in a TNA ring, in well over a decade. Of course, he was the man who essentially got, TNA to the heights that it once had. He was the face of TNA for many years until he left. And this is his first appearance. This was his first appearance there in over a decade. And TNA Wrestling's YouTube page actually showed the moment. They showed several highlights, several clips on their YouTube channel. If you guys haven't seen it, go check it out. But it was a really nice feel-good moment for AJ Styles. He put over the new X Division champion Leon Slater, who defeated Moose to win the X Division title on that show. And there was a multitude of moments. It was definitely a feel-good moment for a lot of old-school TNA fans to see AJ Styles back in TNA. And Slammiversary, from the general consensus is it was a moderate success. And so TNA, is looking after years of just kind of essentially being irrelevant, or just being just another promotion, by the wayside, whose glory days were well past them. TNA looked to, have some moderate success recently. And a lot of people attribute that newfound success, if you will, and the newfound kind of somewhat of a resurgence, if you will, for TNA. A lot of people attribute that to this new partnership that TNA currently has with WWE, which we found out about, I believe, late last year, mid last year, where WWE and TNA now apparently have this working relationship, and they've got this talent exchange where basically you'll see TNA wrestlers make appearances in WWE, specifically like in NXT mostly, and then you'll see certain talents from NXT mainly make appearances on TNA shows, kind of like what you had at Slammiversary. And so TNA and WWE have had this working relationship, or this quote-unquote partnership, for about a year now. And there's a number of people who are basically, a lot of people who have spoken about it, content creators and, people, things of that nature, people who follow those promotions have basically cited that it's a mutually beneficial partnership for both parties, and so on and so forth, for various reasons. And you kind of see it. At least on the surface, it seems like that. But for me, something that happened, especially with this Slammiversary show that they just did, I kind of see it a little bit differently. And I want to kind of explain to you guys in this video why I believe that this working partnership between WWE and TNA isn't quite as mutually beneficial as it appears on the surface. And that's kind of what I wanted to touch on here in this video. And again, going back to what happened yesterday at Slammiversary, there was one or two things that happened that kind of really got me to thinking, like, is this really as mutually beneficial as people believe it is? This partnership between WWE and TNA, in terms of NXT or whatever. So if you think about it on the surface, like I said before, they got this talent exchange and whatever, and you'll see TNA talents, wrestlers making appearances on WWE shows and primarily NXT, but every now and then you'll see them make appearances on like main roster shows. Like, for example, the Royal Rumble, you had several TNA talents making appearances in the Royal Rumble, both the men's and women's. And you had one specific TNA wrestler, that being the TNA champion at the time, Joe Hendry, making an appearance at WrestleMania this year, only to get beaten like 3 minutes by Randy Orton. So it is what it is. And then you had like TNA's president actually basically go out on social media recently. I think this was a recent story. I think like a week or two ago, maybe 2-3 weeks ago, basically went on an interview and said that Joe Hendry's appearance at WrestleMania was, quote, the biggest moment in TNA's history. And I'm thinking to myself, are you freaking kidding me? A guy, you sent your champion out to WrestleMania to job to Randy Orton in 3 minutes, and that's the TNA's biggest moment. It's like, are you kidding me? It's like, come on now, have some more pride in yourself. Have some more pride in your company and your talents. I'm sorry, that just, to me, it was a bad look. It was a bad look. You had the champion of your company go out there and job to a guy, Randy Orton's no slouch, but he's certainly not anywhere near his prime. He's certainly nowhere near as good as prominent as he used to be. And you have your top TNA guy going to WrestleMania and basically get beaten 3 minutes in front of that fucking crowd. And it's like, that's your biggest moment? Get real. You know what I'm saying? But it's stuff like that. And people say that, it's mutually beneficial in the sense that, WWE, where, they have access to TNA's talents, and, you'll have, again, TNA talents making appearances, their champions, some of their champions, and, certain, members of their roster make appearance on WWE shows, and they can kind of use them and borrow them and stuff like that, just like any working partnership or relationship. Look what AEW does with CMLL and New Japan, for example. They have talent exchanges. So this is kind of WWE using their quote-unquote talent exchange to where TNA talents, they can borrow TNA talents and make appearances on their shows for NXT for certain storylines and matches, and they can hype that up. And then on the flip side, with TNA, you obviously have more visibility. You have the benefit of having having your wrestlers, your talents, make appearances on the bigger stages, that being WWE, like I said, the Royal Rumble, WrestleMania, and then, having their talents being featured on NXT in front of a, much bigger audience. And let's be real, TNA's audience has been minuscule for the better part of a decade now. They have, they've been on freaking, they've had a revolving door of ownership, a revolving door of, TV deals. They're on Access TV now, and it's like their visibility in terms of them as a wrestling show, as a promotion, has been, just completely shriveled, just completely shrunk, to the umpteenth degree, since the 2010s, so the early 2010s. So they get the benefit of having their talents, being shown, being showcased, having their promotion, being advertised essentially on the bigger stages. And also, again, you have certain NXT talents that will make appearances on TNA shows and so on and so forth, like I saw at Slammiversary. But the thing about it is this. People will sit here and they will tout this working relationship and this partnership like it's mutually beneficial. And I just personally believe that it isn't as mutually beneficial as these people would like you to believe. I think that on the surface it may appear that way, but in the grand scheme of things, in terms of this working relationship between the two, ultimately it's only going to be beneficial to one side, and that is WWE. Because if you think about it, what does WWE, ask yourself this question, what does WWE ultimately gain from partnering with TNA? TNA isn't some big force. Like, it's not like back in the 2010s and in the 2000s where they were the number 2 wrestling promotion. You know, they were actively attempting to compete with WWE, and obviously they failed heavy. You know, when they tried. Of course, this was around a period where Hogan and Bischoff came in. You know, we all know what happened with that, but we all know how that played out. But it's like, you know, they don't have the same visibility, the same appeal as they did back then, you know, when they were the number 2 promotion in the States. And they had, you know, a fairly sizable audience. You know, they had a fairly sizable, you know, fan base, a loyal fan base. And obviously that has well since passed. And, you know, there's just been, like I said, they've been something akin to an indie promotion. Like, they've really, really fallen off the face of the planet in the last 10 years. And it's like, you know, they haven't really done much of anything. You know, they've had, again, like I mentioned before, you know, they've staved off, you know, bankruptcy many times. They have a revolving door of ownership. They went from one owner to one owner to one owner, so on and so forth. They went from different channel to different channel, so on and so forth. And it's like, you know, what benefit does WWE get from partnering with a promotion like TNA? Well, there's one thing that I think ultimately they are looking for. And that is, or one thing that they're looking at when it comes to TNA as to what, to me, is the driving force for them wanting to partner with them. And that is the talent. Because TNA, even to this day, has some pretty solid talents. You know, they have some young talents. They have some older talents who have kind of, you know, come and gone. You know, you got the guy, you know, guys like the Hardys, you know, talents like the Hardys. They got Moose there. They got, you know, guys like Mike Santana who have recently come there. You know, you got, you know, the Mustafa Ali's. You got the Nemeths. You know, you got various talents who come and go. But they also have young, up-and-coming guys like, you know, Leon Slater, you know, like other guys, you know, like the X Division talents, and even their women's division, the Knockouts division. You know, they've got a number of players that, you know, TNA, you know, say what you will about them, but they've always been, you know, somewhat decent at, you know, gathering talent or, you know, pushing, you know, certain wrestlers, especially the younger guys, especially guys within that kind of X Division circle. So, and personally, I think WWE looks at that, and to me, and again, this is just from my viewpoint, they view TNA as nothing more than sort of a secondary. They view TNA as little more than kind of a secondary farm system, basically, where they look at them as a promotion. They say, "Oh, they have some talents that we could use. How about we kind of try and get in good with them? Let's team up with them under the skies of a working partnership or a working relationship. And then when those guys in TNA that we're looking at, in terms of, you know, wanting to bring them in, when their contract is up with them, then we can bring them over to our promotion." And so on and so forth. And that's pretty much what's happened. I mean, look at Jordynne Grace, for example. Jordynne Grace, longtime TNA talent, now she's in WWE. She's in NXT. And so I think WWE views TNA as little more than a farm system, like, you know, kind of like what they're doing with AAA right now. And, you know, and I'll get to them in a little bit. But I'll mention them again, you know, in a little bit. But I think that's how WWE views TNA. They want to use them. They want to basically pretty much do what they've done to more or less every other wrestling promotion in the last 20, 30 years that they've, you know, that has had some semblance of success, not on the level of WWE, but they want to use them as a farm system. They take a look at them, see what talents are interesting or what talents have potential, and then they pluck those talents from those promotions, they bring them in, and then they raise them up, bring them up into their, incorporate them into their system, and then they fucking use them and then plug them into their fucking into their promotion, their company, and all that kind of stuff. Much like they did with Ring of Honor years ago. Much like they did with New Japan years ago, before obviously AEW came around. And if you think about the grand scheme of things and what WWE is, especially now that they're owned by TKO, Endeavor, and all that, it's like, and even back when Vince McMahon owned them, it's like WWE has, this is what people need to realize, WWE has zero interest in working like hand in hand, side by side with any other promotion out there. They have zero interest in having a working relationship with other promotions. What WWE wants is they want to control other promotions. WWE wants a monopoly on pro wrestling. I mean, that's fucking obvious. It's as plain as day. It's obvious. Okay, you look at the moves, the things that they've done in the last 4 decades. It is apparent. It is obvious. It should be plain as day to people. They want to be the only game in town. They want to be the ones who dictate how things go to everybody else. They want to be the main game in town. They want to be the ideal wrestling promotion. They want to be the land of milk and honey that everybody dreams of, getting to. So that way they can dictate what these wrestlers' salaries are. They can dictate, what the company want the wrestlers to do. And they don't want they don't want these wrestlers, to have options. They don't want wrestlers to say, oh, I don't think I like what I'm getting paid here. Why don't I go to this other place? And that's why WWE can't stand AEW. That's why for the last couple years now, everything WWE has done has been in some way to intervene and to try to hamper what AEW is doing, because they don't want AEW around. They don't want competition. Okay? It kills them. It burns them up that AEW even exists. Because of AEW's existence, wrestlers who become free agents, wherever they come from, they have options. It's no longer, WWE's the only mainstream company in pro wrestling. No, there are 2 mainstream promotions in the States in terms of wrestling, in terms of the landscape of pro wrestling. There's WWE and there's AEW. So wrestlers have options now. They don't have to fucking sit there and settle for whatever bullshit WWE gives them. They can go to AEW and they can have a better option. And WWE can't stand that, because WWE wants to be the only game in town. They want to dictate what wrestlers make. They want to dictate what wrestlers get paid, what wrestlers, what their working schedule should be. They want to control all that. And they can't do that as long as AEW exists. And this just goes to show you that they don't want a working relationship with any other promotion. They want to control other promotions. They want to have a monopoly over the pro wrestling business. That's why they did what they did earlier this year. They bought out AAA. Because they want to fucking have a presence and an audience in Mexico. And they want to challenge AEW in that regard. They want to challenge, AEW's partner CMLL in that regard. So what did they do? They went out and they purchased AAA. And partly that was because one of the head honchos in AAA, one of the owners or part owners, or the person who makes, one of the people who makes the decision in AAA, that being Conan, is a big fucking Triple H WWE shill, and he wants to rub elbows with Triple H and WWE for the longest time because he's a fucking paid shill, and he basically exposed himself for being one. But yeah, so WWE now owns a majority share of AAA. And now you're going to see these quote-unquote joint shows between WWE and AAA, where WWE's going to try to dip their hand, going to try to dip their toe into the lucha market, into the Mexico market now. And who knows how far that's going to go. But yeah, that's the reason why they do that. And when you look at this whole thing between WWE and WWE and TNA, to me it's no different. To me, WWE only views TNA as a farming system. WWE only views a TNA as a place to where they can get talents from. They do not value TNA as a partner. They do not care about TNA on the grand scheme of things. For WWE, it's either one or two things. Either A, they're using them as a farm system and want to pluck their talents, like again a Jordan Grace, like a Joe Hendry, like whoever else they got, whoever else they're looking at, maybe a Moose, maybe a Mike Santana, whoever else. You got the Hardys there who are tag champions, so on and so forth. A lot of a number of ex-WWE talents are in TNA right now as well, so there's kind of that thing there too. But either A, they view TNA as a farm system, and they want to plug their talents, or the ones that they want to use, the up-and-coming talents that TNA develops, that WWE at some point wants to use themselves. Or B, they want to do what they did with AAA and just buy TNA outright. Because I've heard that story too. I've been hearing reports of that too, where WWE has expressed interest in buying TNA. I would not be surprised if that was the case. I would not be surprised if that happened in the next year. Because look at what they did with AAA. They did the same thing with AAA. Who's to say they won't do the same thing with TNA? This is not some big resurgence for TNA. It's only a matter of time before they're either completely plucked of their talent by WWE, And, whenever TNA talent's contract expires, they're going to go right to WWE. It's either that or they're going to get bought out by WWE. It's one of the two. And people need to realize that. I know there's a lot of people out here who are old, lapsed TNA fans. There are people who were fans of the good days of TNA back in the day, back in the 2000s, back in, from 06 to 09 when they were at their peak. And then even in the 2010s when Hogan and Bischoff came around and they had that, they still had, for the most part, the massive visibility in the States, on Spike TV and such. It's not the same thing. This isn't even close to being the same thing. But, there are a lot of people, there are a lot of lapsed fans, people who are fans of TNA who see what's going on and they're thinking to themselves, oh, maybe this is a resurgence for TNA. It's not. Sadly, it's not. The reason why WWE is trying so hard to prop up TNA to the level that they want to get at is because, once again, they're trying to stick it to AEW. They want to use TNA as a way to hamper AEW. That's why they're doing it. That's why they're doing it. Literally everything that WWE has done, or that they have been doing for the last year or so, has been in some way, shape, or form to hamper AEW. Why do you think they're going out of their way to counter-promote and counter-program AEW shows? It's for that reason. And they're promoting TNA for the exact same reason. Because they're trying desperately to get TNA to be the counter, to be the alter, to be the alternative, quote-unquote, to AEW, to try to hamper AEW. It's going to fail, but they're going to try their damnedest to do that. Okay? There's ulterior motives all over the fucking place. In the grand scheme of things, WWE does not care about TNA as a whole. And let me just explain to you why I think that. Because last night at Slammiversary, you had a series of interpromotional matches, right? You had a match in the women's division between NXT's women's champion, Jacy Jayne, and at the time, the TNA Knockouts champion, Masha Slamovich, in a winner-take-all match for both titles on the line. And also in the main event, you had a three-way match for the TNA World's Heavyweight title. Now, if you think about it, when it comes to this whole partnership, like I mentioned before, a lot of times, or for the majority of the year, you've seen TNA wrestlers make appearances on NXT, and vice versa. You've seen NXT talents make appearances on TNA. Here's the thing, though. You have a NXT talent in Trick Williams, who is the TNA World's Heavyweight Champion, and has been for a couple months now. And you got to think to yourself, why in the world, if you're TNA, would you have your top title, the most important title in your promotion, being held by a talent, a wrestler from WWE's, quote, developmental system or developmental brand? What sense does that make? Like, you had fucking Joe Hendry as your TNA World Champion, you could argue the most over guy in your company for a long time. He had that visibility, he had that borderline, not necessarily mainstream appeal, but, he had that, his fucking, theme, his theme song, his entrance or whatever that went viral, quote unquote, and all that. And that's ultimately why Joe Hendry got a title push, because his theme went viral. That's the only reason he got a title push. That's the only reason he got a main event push, because his theme went viral. That's why he made an appearance at the Royal Rumble. That's why he made that appearance at WrestleMania. And he got squashed by fucking Randy Orton in 3 minutes. That right there should tell you what WWE thinks about TNA. But you have your TNA World's Heavyweight title being held by an NXT guy, by a developmental brand. Your main World's title being held by another promotion's developmental brand. That literally makes no sense. That would be like a fucking NFL. That would be like what's a good comparison I can make? That would be like, God, I can't make any. I was going to use like a sports reference, but it wouldn't be. I don't think it would do this justice. But it's like, if you're a wrestling promotion and you have a World's Heavyweight title, a title that you portray as the most important title in your company, that everybody within said company fights and claws and does everything that they have to do to get. They covet this title more than anything. Why would you have that title being held and being defended by not only another promotion's talent or another promotion's wrestler, but by another promotions wrestler who's not even a main roster talent, who is in NXT. What sense does that make? And after Slammiversary, like I mentioned before, you had two, or they had more than that, but in terms of title matches, they had two inter-promotion matches. You had Masha Slamovich, who was the TNA Knockouts champion, and you had Jacy Jayne, who was the NXT Women's champion. Winner take all match. Jacy Jayne wins the fucking match. And so Jacy Jayne of NXT is now both the NXT Women's champion and the TNA Knockouts champion. So you have NXT wrestlers, developmental brand wrestlers, who now hold two TNA World's titles. They hold the TNA Knockouts title, the Women's Division's title, and they hold the Men's Mains title. They held the Women's Main title and the Men's Main title. What sense does that make? And in the main event, by the way, there was a three-way, like I mentioned before, with Trick Williams, who defended the TNA World's title, against Mike Santana and the former champion, Joe Hendry. And Trick Williams fucking retained. Now, need I remind you that they wrestled this match, the show took place at the UBS Arena in Long Island, which was Mike Santana's backyard. It was essentially a homecoming match for him. He was essentially the hometown guy. The general consensus going into the match was that Mike Santana was going to win the match in front of his hometown crowd. He is from Brooklyn, which isn't too far from where they were. Rhode Island, or Long Island, I should say. I said Rhode Island. Long Island, if I messed up. Long Island, New York, which isn't too far from Brooklyn. I mean, fucking, that's all New York. That's fucking the same area. New York City. It's his fucking backyard. It's his wheelhouse. Why would you not have fucking Mike Santana win that match? Instead, you have fucking Trick Williams retain. What fucking sense does that make? Now, if you're TNA, I don't even know if they're fucking paying attention to this, but TNA, they now have two titles, two of their top titles in the men's and the women's division, being held by NXT talents, being held by developmental brand wrestlers. Fucking Trick Williams is the Trick Williams is the TNA World Champion, and Jacy Jayne is the TNA Knockout Champion. What sense does this make? Is this supposed to be mutually beneficial? Mutually beneficial, yet you've got two talents from the opposing promotion's developmental holding two of your top titles. Are there any TNA wrestlers holding NXT titles right now? No, I didn't think so. But yet you have two NXT wrestlers who are holding TNA titles. What sense does this fucking make? How is this mutually beneficial? Like, this right here just goes to show you what WWE ultimately thinks of TNA. They think that TNA is lesser than their fucking developmental brand. They don't view TNA as anything more than a glorified farm system. And I trust and believe in the next year or so, that is what they're going to end up being. And it's a damn shame because TNA does have a lot of upside, or they have quite a bit of upside going for them, despite everything that happened in their past. They've got a lot of young up-and-coming talents, a lot of guys who are, young, like I said, fresh. They're, a solid wrestler, solid act, so on and so forth. And it's like, in the right hands, under the right circumstance, maybe TNA could be something again. Not to the level that they were or used to be. They're not going to be a main player in the States. Okay, they're not even going to be maybe they'll be the number 3 or number 4. I seriously doubt they're ever going to be like number 1 or 2, especially not number 1 but not even number 2. Okay, they're not touching AEW, they're not touching WWE. So people need to get that out of their minds right now. They need to get that out of their minds right now. I mean, this is a promotion that can't even barely get 5,000, pay-per-view buys for their pay-per-view buys for their shows, for the pay-per-views they run on a semi-monthly basis. So, like I mentioned before, this show that they did at Slammiversary, where they had 7,000 people at the UBS Arena, that's their biggest live audience in fucking over a decade, from what I understand. So yeah, it's like they're not really going to be anything more than what they are right now. Which, to some people may, again, considering how everything that's happened to them within the last 10 years, within the last decade, some people are looking at them and say, hey, maybe there's some positivity to be had, so on and so forth. And I understand all that for sure. But I'm just looking at it from the standpoint of, they're basically essentially going to be used by WWE. They're going to be used. If they're not bought out outright, they're going to have all their talents plucked from them, all the young talents or the up-and-coming talents, whoever WWE values. You already saw it with Jordan Grace. You see it with Joe Hendry. When his contract is up, he's likely going to go right to WWE because they already basically telegraphed that. If he's still valuable to this point, and he's not just a one-off, a one-hit wonder, in terms of, him getting viral, his theme getting viral and all that. If he's, for the most part, he's, people need to understand Joe Hendry, for the majority of his career, he was basically a comedy act. And his theme going viral is just like one of those kind of things where you didn't really predict it, but it happened. And that's the reason, like I said before, that's the reason why he had that big title push. Because he had all that exposure, he had all these people singing and chanting his name, and he basically became a meme. He basically became a meme, more or less. And that's why he had the exposure that he's had. And at some point, that's going to get old. It's going to get stale. And the question is, can he maintain that? Can he maintain that positive momentum? That remains to be seen. But yeah, like, folks, people need to understand this partnership between TNA and WWE, kind of getting back to my main point of this video, this partnership between WWE and TNA is not mutually beneficial in the grand scheme of things. It's going to be beneficial to WWE, where WWE is going to basically milk TNA for pretty much any and every talent, young up-and-coming, talent with potential that they've got. If they don't buy them outright, they're going to basically pluck all their talents from them, and they're basically going to leave them with whatever they got, whatever they end up having at the end of the day. WWE does not value TNA as a partner promotion. You see that with what they're doing right now. You got NXT talents holding TNA championships. But you look on the other side, do any TNA talents hold NXT titles? Do you see any TNA talents holding NXT championships? Of course you don't. Do you see any TNA talents holding main roster WWE titles? Hell no, you don't. And you likely never will. Because WWE does not value TNA. They do not value those TNA talents. Now, when those TNA talents become WWE talents full on, like a Jordan Grace, for example, then you'll start seeing them fucking win WWE titles. Until then, they're just going to be fuel. They're just going to be fodder, pretty much. They're just going to be fuel to be added to fucking NXT or wherever it is they want to fucking feature these guys at. Wherever it is they want to pluck these guys at. Mostly NXT shows, maybe a main roster appearance here and there if you're a big enough name like a Joe Hendry or whatever, or the Hardys or whoever. That's all WWE views TNA as. And this is what people need to understand. That at the end of the day, TNA is just another farm system for WWE. And it's sad to put it that way because TNA has had quite a history. They got quite a, if you want to call it a legacy, they've made quite a name for themselves. After all these years, after all the turmoil, everything that promotion has been through, and they're still going. That's a testament to how long they've been around and how much they've been through, and the fact that they're still around, that's a testament to how tough that promotion is. But I think at the end of the day, unless something changes, they're going to end up being used by WWE, just like every other promotion before them. And it sucks. It really does. Because WWE wants to be the only game in town. And they know that as long as promotions like AEW and TNA and New Japan and others exist, they're not going to be the only game in town. And I just hope that TNA learns this lesson before it's too late. Just saying. Just something to think about, folks. Just something to think about. This is just something that I kind of floated out there. Like when I saw the results for Slammiversary, and I saw that fucking Trick Williams retain the TNA World's title, and I saw that they had fucking JC Jane, of all people, winning the TNA Knockouts title from Masha Slamovich, as big as Masha Slamovich has been, and you have JC Jane fucking beat her, and it's like, what are we doing here? Why are NXT talents holding TNA titles, but no TNA talents are holding NXT titles. What sense does this make? I thought this was a mutually beneficial partnership. I guess not. And it's not likely going to be. And that's what I need the people watching this video to understand. And that's what I need folks to understand. That's just how I see things. So that's pretty much my stance on that. So to me, it's not a mutually beneficial partnership. WWE is going to either buy out TNA or they're going to pluck all their talents from them. That's what I think is going to happen. And it sucks, but that's the reality of it. That's all I got to say for this video, though. Thank you for watching. Sorry if this video ran kind of long, but I did have quite a bit to say here. But thanks for watching once again. Be sure to leave a like. Be sure to leave a like on this video. Leave a comment. Give me your thoughts on anything I talked about here. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Appreciate all the support I can get. If that being said, it's pretty much going to do it, man. So thanks for watching once more. Have a good rest of your day. I'll see you guys in the next video. Till then, Wrestling Otaku, I'm out. See you guys later.